Disappointed!
Okay, so I've been looking forward to this movie for at least a year. It was one of the few bright spots on the 2023 movie calendar for me. I mean, an epic war movie about the life of Napoleon from Ridley Scott. How could it go? How could it go wrong? And it's not like this is the worst historical biopic I've ever seen. I mean, it at least gets names, places, and dates right, which is more than a lot of them do. And it doesn't kill anyone who lived through the events, unlike movies like, say, Braveheart, and they're all acclaimed. To me, I'm not. There a lot is being said about the historical inaccuracies, but to me, that's not what makes a bad movie. As I just mentioned, there are a ton of movies that have done that are historically inaccurate that are still praised as masterpieces. Braveheart, Saving Private Ryan, the list, Spartacus, the list is almost endless. And besides, I'm not an expert on French history. My field of expertise lies more in ancient Rome and American history rather than anything to do with the French Revolution, so I'm not the one to nitpick this anyway. But the problem of this movie was one of too much ambition for its runtime. Way too much. Every single problem cascades from that one bad decision. Here's the thing, if you want to explore a character and give an audience a sense of who they were and what the historical events were like, and you only have 2.5 hours to do the story, especially if it's somebody like Napoleon, you don't try to tell their whole life. What should have been done is they should have taken one event that encapsulated everything that they stood for, everything people thought about them, and, sort of tied it all together into one thing, and tied it all into that one event. And you could see what different people thought of them and the whole range of their personality. As it is, this movie is just stretched far too thin. And many of the historical inaccuracies are a direct result of them trying to fit everything in here, and it just doesn't work. It can't work. There's no way to make it work. I kept feeling like, here's the problem. Here's the problem. Here's what makes this movie so hard for me to review, is it's not like I hated my time watching this movie. I didn't. There were definitely a lot of scenes that I liked, particularly the battle scenes. Did a good job of showing what the technology was like, showing how the tactics work. The trouble is, they didn't put you into Napoleon's head enough in those scenes. They're just sort of battle scenes that happened. Now, they're very good looking, and I might actually buy this movie on 4K just so I can watch the battle scenes on my projector outside some night in 4K, because I'd watch it with my surround sound, my big speakers and everything, because because those are impressive, and it can't be understated just how hard this stuff must have been to stage and how hard it must have been to shoot. And the whole movie looks really good. And Jekyll and Phoenix, he does a very good job playing the part that was written for him. Unfortunately, I'm not sure the part that was written for him was Napoleon Bonaparte. So that's a major problem. And the movie just doesn't have time. It doesn't really give him any sort of arc. Like, you know how he was able to so brilliantly cap his performance was so brilliant in Joker because Joker had an arc you could see in that movie, and it was building to something, and it was saying something about society. Trouble is, this movie is so rushed, I'm not sure what it's trying to say. Not to mention, and then it's just like you go as soon as you get into the political situation, as soon as you feel like you're getting a grip on the political situation, and that's the other thing this movie is bad at. If you don't know French history, you will be lost. Thankfully, while I'm not an expert, I haven't read a ton of books on it or anything, I do know the basic events that happened in this period in French history, so I was able to put the pieces together. But it does a horrible job explaining it to you. Like, there's just a royalist uprising out of nowhere. All of a sudden, Robespierre is just unpopular. It starts off with a woman you've not... I mean, the movie starts with a woman that you're literally not introduced to. You're supposed to be horrified, and yeah, you should be horrified by, this woman being pelted with rotten vegetables and then getting her head hacked off. But you're not even told who the woman is within the context of the film. You're just expected to know that. And that, to me, is the biggest sin this movie creates, is it expects you to know everything. It doesn't really stop to tell a story for the uninitiated. It's just Ridley Scott reenacting some of his favorite events from history in an artistic fashion, which, yeah, looks good, but it's not a viewer-friendly experience, and when you're making a $200 million movie, you kind of need a viewer-friendly experience. I'm sorry, that's part of your job as the director. Again, and here's the thing, I don't have anything against dense films or films that don't appeal to everybody. One of my favorite directors of all time is David Lynch. But, but this isn't him he doesn't try to communicate like a dreamlike state or anything. He's not trying to communicate an emotion. In fact, there's very little emotion in this movie. It just sort of, even between Napoleon and Josephine, here's the problem it does this thing where it shows one thing about their relationship when they're in person and talking to each other, and it's telling one story that way, and it seems to be a story about two toxic people who bring out the worst in each other and are kind of abusive to each other. But then, when it shifts to actually having to reference their letters to each other, which we have in history, it's then telling a completely different story. And it's like, okay, and there's no bridge between the two. They don't really do anything to try and show why they went from one extreme to the other. It just sort of happens. And again, I blame the runtime. I feel like this really should have been a miniseries. This really should have been like a 12 one-hour episode epic miniseries if they were going to do the whole life of Napoleon. Because the biggest problem is they'll do a couple of scenes where you're starting to get into and understand the politics of what's going on, and you start getting into, and that seems to be your driving force, and you're really on board, and then they have to go into a relationship scene, and you start getting on board and going, oh, okay, this movie is about their relationship, and you start getting really interested in that. But then it'll switch gears to the battle scene, and those battle scenes will come out of nowhere, and none of these things lead into each other. Like, he just meets Josephine at the random party, but and it's so rushed that he gets told that the people want him to be emperor, but we haven't had any scenes of him bonding with the army. We haven't had any. There are no scenes of him There are no scenes showing why he's popular. There are no scene. It doesn't even bother to explain why France is at war with all these other countries and why Napoleon is defending their borders. All they say is that he brilliantly defended the borders. They don't even show it. They show one minor action set piece, and then an hour later in the movie, without anything else really happening other than him getting into a relationship with Josephine and a bunch of talk about international politics, all of a sudden we're being told that this guy who, if you don't know the history, appears to just be a random guy who's only had one successful battle, all of a sudden we're being told that everybody wants him to be emperor. That's the type of movie it is. All of a sudden, I mean, we go from, in one scene, him marrying the Tsar of Russia's sister, to, all of a sudden, to the very next scene, he says the Tsar has declared war on him. And we're not given any reason why that happened, as the only time we saw him and the Tsar interact, they were very friendly and they seemed to be best buds. We're not... the movie wants us to believe it's some epic betrayal, you know, and I'm sure that's what it felt like to Napoleon in real life, but unless you've read the history, the movie doesn't tell you anything. So, I feel like that's this movie's greatest crime. Is it the worst thing ever made? No, it's far from it. Is it the worst movie of the year? No, it's not. But it's a movie that doesn't even bother to explain its own plot. It doesn't really seem to care about its own plot or its own characters. It just sort of wants to get through these events, and it really is a crime of it really is a crime, because this could have been such a great film if they had just focused on one event and then just use that to explore the whole range of Napoleon's personality and how different people saw him. Here is what I thought as I was walking out of the theater. If I were making this movie, and if I were told that I had to make a 2.5-hour movie about Napoleon Bonaparte, and they wanted like a character study, they wanted to show, and I was told by the studio they wanted to show some of the epic battles. They wanted to show his relationship with Josephine. They wanted to show how people reacted internationally to him, and they wanted to show what his relationship was with his brother and the French government. Here's what I would have done. I would have focused on something that is usually glossed over in most movies, and is glossed over in this one, and that is the ascension of Napoleon to emperor. I would have covered that few months period and used that to explore all his character. Because, think about it, if you just had the movie focus on this general, you know, becoming a consul and then becoming emperor, you could have used flashbacks and people talking about him within that to show brief flashes of the battles, and you could have covered it much more. You could have covered it much better. You could have had scenes where they discussed the international political situation and showed why people wanted him to be emperor. You could have showed his relationship with those people. You could have showed how his relationship with Josephine was affected by his ascending to the throne of France. You could have shown how all the powers of Europe reacted to him becoming emperor. You could have shown all that, and then ended the movie on a very dramatic note of his coronation, and that could have been the climax of. You could have made it about an ambitious man an ambitious man who also had a sense of duty to his country, ascending to his throne ascending to the highest position of power in what is probably the most turbulent period of his country's history. And you could have had like a bittersweet ending where he reaches his ultimate glory, but you show that but then you do like montage showing the nations of Europe a lot, showing, but then you like pull out. I would have ended the movie by pulling out, by showing him, ascended, and then pull out from the view of Paris, go in, and it becomes a view of the map, and then the music starts to get ominous, and and then you show a map, and you show like the colors changing on the map to show all the nations of Europe that are united against France now, and how his ascension to the throne has sort of put France in a very difficult position that they would pay a price for later on. And then you just fade out saying that Napoleon's greatest triumphs and his greatest and his greatest downfalls were yet to come. But you use it, but I would have made it a character piece centered on his coronation. That's just what I would have done. Now, on the bright side, as I said, I did enjoy parts of this movie. The part where, and I will say, the part where the one of the few times I felt genuine emotion. It gave me one of the few times I felt genuine emotion this year at the movies, and that was when Napoleon finds out that Josephine has died and that her butler made off with his letters to her, so he doesn't even have those anymore. He sold them. That to me, that was a heartbreaking scene. I mean, good night. I don't care who you are or what you've done. You can't get. It doesn't get much worse than that for it. It just doesn't. And so, yeah. And there were some good battle scenes, and at least from what I could tell, the movie theater was about 3/4 full when I saw it last night. From what I could tell, most of the people coming out, they were talking to each other, and they were looking up facts about Napoleon on their phones. They were like typing on their cell phones, Googling facts. And while I don't believe the internet is the best place to do historical research, maybe there is a bright side to this, in that it will get people to look into something and study a subject that they didn't know before. I mean, at least there's that. So it's not a completely worthless movie. There are good parts to it. And I wouldn't say I regret seeing it, but it's an unfocused mess simply because of one bad decision that was made early in production that doomed everything else. And so all the hard work makes it feel like this is going to be a very tough one for anyone who's not. Here's the thing, is they limited themselves to history buffs by assuming that you knew the history, yet they also offended the history buffs by changing so much to history to make it work within the format that they chose. So this is going to be a hard sell to really anyone who doesn't just want to see a spectacle, who just doesn't want to see some of the spectacle. And even then, I feel like they should. I just wish they had committed to one version of it. They had committed to like one version of this movie. Either make it about him and Josephine, make it about the politics, or make it about the battles. If you're going to do a 2.5-hour run, this just shows you can't tell the story of a whole life in 2.5 hours. You just can't. Well, anyway. But it's not worthless. I mean, I'd say this is a 5.5 out of 10. But anyway, hope you found this interesting, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.